Hey everyone, this is Jamie and this is my video response for Unit 6. So the prompt pretty much said, explain why responsibility is so important and then how you implement it in your classroom or in your practices. So according to the textbook, pretty much it gave you like a really vague definition of what responsibility was, um, which is, in my opinion, really important to understand because it's so stretched out. So there's responsibility like where you understand the consequences of all of your actions, whether it's a positive consequence or a negative consequence. And then moving forward from that, you look at is it a responsibility to take action? Is it a responsibility for your consequences? Or looking at what you've already done, pretty much. So the importance of your responsibility and why it's important to everyone's life in general, whether or not you're a student or an athlete or just a random person doing their job, working. Each person has a responsibility to themselves where, you need to maintain your health. You need to make sure you're going to work, you're going to school, you're getting good grades, you're trying your best. That's your responsibility. You're not responsible for anyone else. You're not responsible for the person next to you. Unless, of course, if you're a coach, you're responsible for your athletes. If you're a parent, you're responsible for your children. But those are technically like your jobs. I'm going to use parenting as a job because you chose to have children. You're choosing to be responsible for another human being. Same thing with coaches and teachers. You're going into a job where that is your responsibility. Your role is to take care of them, to supervise them, to make them better, to help them reach their goals in whatever aspect it was. So the way that I teach it at practice, there's two different ways, and it depends on my mood, and sad as that is, it depends on how the coach's mood is and how the athletes are reacting to them. So for swimming, I coach a swim team. Everything's pretty individualized. It's not a team effort for the most part, unless it's a relay. You're responsible for your own actions, your own times, your own effort. So for a swimmer, let's say that we're doing 10 50s, so it's 2 laps of freestyle 10 times on a certain time base. Let's say a swimmer, for whatever reason, isn't making that time base, or they're just going slow. Either they're not making their time bases because they're too slow and they're really struggling with it, or they're not trying. It is that student's responsibility to finish all 10 50s. Now it's that student's or that athlete's choice if they're not going to do it. Sometimes I pointed out to them like, hey, you only did 9 50s, you need to finish another one. Sometimes I let it go, and some kids will complain about like, hey, he only did 9, we had to do 10. I'm just like, you know what, be responsible for yourselves, because they're not putting in the effort, they're not going to get the whole amount of practice. That's their choice not to do it. So it comes from both ways, and sometimes I like to let my children do it on their own. I'm going to let them be responsible for themselves. So when Sally is going so much more faster than Jane, I'm going to tell Jane, like, you know what? Sally does all the 50s. She tries her hardest. She's at every single practice. She does all the sets, and she's doing it on her own. You're skipping it left and right. You're faster, but you're not trying as hard. That's why your times aren't improving. But then on the other hand, I like to point it out, so where I'm just like, hey, Jane, you're not doing your 1050s, do another one. Or, hey, you need to push a little bit harder, you're not making the time sets. So that way I hold them accountable. Like, I'm making sure that I'm a presence. So it does flip both ways for myself. For other coaches, I would suggest, making sure that you're present at practice so that the athlete or the student knows that you're there. Because if you're just kind of like on your phone, or you're talking to parents all the time, or you're only focusing on a few different students or just a few different athletes, they're not going to try as hard. It's your responsibility to watch them, to supervise them, to motivate them, to recognize them. So that's really important, and it's something to take into accountability for yourselves, and just understand what your role is. I feel like once athletes are responsible for themselves, they'll push them a lot harder. Sometimes they'll have bad days, and that's okay. But for the majority of their practices, they're going to understand why practice is so important. So that's my response. I look forward to hearing from you guys. Have a good day. Bye-bye.